The Demonweb Pits stretch across reality like a cancer, where countless planes intersect as strands in an infinite web. At their center sits the most dangerous deity the elven race has ever known. She did not claw her way to power through the abyss like other demon lords. She fell there, cast down by the very god who once loved her, and in that fall transformed the dark elves into something the surface would never recognize again. Lolth, the Spider Queen, the Demon Queen of Spiders, the Queen of the Demonweb Pits. She wears many names, but they all speak to the same terrible truth. She embodies chaos given divine form, spinning schemes that span millennia while her children wage eternal war in her name. This is not a goddess who demands simple worship. Lolth requires her followers to prove themselves constantly, to engage in endless trials of cunning and cruelty, to understand that mercy is weakness and betrayal is survival. In the Underdark cities where Drow civilization festers, priestesses conduct elaborate rituals that would horrify surface dwellers, not out of mindless evil but because their goddess has taught them a fundamental lesson. Only the strong deserve to exist. She has shaped an entire species in her image, creating a people as impressive as they are horrifying. Before she became the Spider Queen, before the Demonweb Pits existed as her domain, Lolth was Arashnee. She walked among the Seldarine as a goddess of weaving, destiny, and artisans, consort to Corellon Larethian himself, the chief deity of the elven pantheon. Their union produced children who would become gods in their own right. But Arashnee nursed ambitions that went beyond partnership. She wanted supremacy over the entire pantheon, and she was willing to orchestrate the most audacious betrayal in elven history to achieve it. The conspiracy Arashnee wove involved other ambitious deities. She manipulated her own son, Veyron, convincing him to support her bid for power. She positioned herself as Corellon's replacement through careful political maneuvering. The exact details of her plot vary depending on which elven sage tells the story, but the outcome remains consistent across all tellings. She orchestrated an attack on Corellon during a moment where his defenses were lowered, when he trusted his consort absolutely. Some versions claim she worked with the orc deity Grumsh. Others suggest she convinced minor gods to turn against their leader. What matters is that her betrayal was discovered before it could succeed. Corellon's fury was absolute. He stripped Arashnee of her divine portfolio, severed her connection to the Seldarine, and cast her down from Arvandor into the abyss itself. This was not just exile but transformation. As she fell through the plains, her form changed. Her beauty twisted into something alien and terrible. She grew additional limbs, her lower body becoming that of a massive spider. When she finally crashed into the 66th layer of the abyss, she had become something new entirely. Araushnee was dead. Lolth was born. But Lolth retained her divine power. The abyss could not strip that from her. The chaotic nature of that plane resonated with the rage and ambition that had always driven her. She claimed the 66th layer as her own, reshaping it into the Demonweb Pits, a realm of interconnected webs that spanned not just one layer, but touched upon countless planes of existence. Where other demon lords fought for supremacy through brute force, Lolth built her power base through patience and planning. She had eternity to work with, and she had a very specific target in mind for her revenge. The elves who had followed Arashnee, who had believed in her vision of a different pantheon, faced their own judgment. They were not cast into the abyss, but instead banished to the Underdark, the vast network of caverns and tunnels far beneath the surface world. The punishment was intended to be temporary, a chance for redemption, a period of reflection before they would be welcomed back to the light. Corellon and the Seldarine expected these fallen elves to eventually reject the teachings of their traitorous goddess and return to proper worship. Lolth had other plans. From her throne in the Demonweb Pits, she reached out to these exiled elves. She spoke to them in dreams and visions. She appeared to their priestesses in moments of desperation. She offered them what the Seldarine would not: acceptance of who they were, acknowledgement of their anger and resentment, and most importantly, power. Not the power that comes from redemption and returning to grace, but the power that comes from embracing exile and making it an identity. The transformation was gradual but inexorable. Over generations, these dark elves changed. Their skin darkened to shades of obsidian and deep purple. Their hair lightened to white, silver, or pale blonde. Most significantly, their culture shifted away from the values the Seldarine had tried to instill. Surface elves valued community and cooperation. The Drow embraced ruthless individualism instead. The surface elves celebrated life and growth through art and nature. The Drow worshipped through blood sacrifice and brutal competition. Surface elves saw the exile as temporary punishment. The Drow claimed their banishment as proof of their superiority, evidence that the Seldarine feared what they would become. Lolth's genius was making the Drow believe the transformation was their choice. She did not force them to worship her through simple domination. Instead, she presented herself as the only deity who understood their true nature, who appreciated their strength rather than condemning their methods. She taught that the Seldarine had always feared what the Dark Elves could become, that the banishment was not about punishment but about keeping potential rivals contained. This narrative resonated because it contained just enough truth to be believable, and because it offered something intoxicating: permission to stop seeking redemption and start seeking dominance. The Drow cities that arose in the Underdark reflected Lolth's teachings perfectly. Benzobransson, Ched Nasad, Erndalin, Veldrinshar, each became a testament to controlled chaos, where noble houses engaged in constant scheming, where power was maintained through fear and cunning, where the weak were cold and the strong elevated. But Lolth made sure that none would grow too strong. Any house that became dominant for too long would mysteriously fall, often through the machinations of its rivals, but sometimes through divine intervention. The Spider Queen demanded constant motion, endless competition, perpetual instability. A stable Drow society might start asking questions. A society locked in permanent struggle would always look to their goddess for guidance. One of Lolth's most significant theological innovations was the establishment of absolute female supremacy within Drow society. This was not just a cultural preference but a religious mandate backed by divine power. Females were closer to Lolth, more capable of channeling her divine magic, more deserving of authority and respect. Males existed to serve, to fight, to provide genetic diversity, but never to rule. This inversion of typical elven gender dynamics served multiple purposes in Lolth's grand design. First, it ensured that positions of real power, high priestess of a house, matron mother of a ruling family, leadership of the temples, all required direct connection to Lolth herself. Males could become powerful wizards or skilled warriors, but they could never access the highest levels of clerical magic without her explicit blessing, and she rarely gave it. This meant that every major decision in Drow society ultimately flowed through someone who was, theoretically at least, under Lolth's direct influence. The goddess had installed herself as the ultimate authority by making her priestesses the only route to her favor. Second, the constant tension between male ambition and female authority created another layer of instability that Lolth could exploit. Males who chafed under matriarchal rule might plot rebellion, given priestesses justification for purges and punishments. Males who accepted their position might be used as tools against other males who showed too much independence. The system was designed to prevent unity while encouraging individual achievement, to reward success while punishing anyone who succeeded too completely. It was brilliantly cruel, and it had been refined over thousands of years. The matron mothers who ruled Drow houses occupied a peculiar position in this hierarchy. They wielded enormous power within their own domains, commanding absolute obedience from their families and retainers. But they also knew that their power was borrowed, that Lolth could withdraw her favor at any moment, that the Spider Queen delighted in toppling the mighty and elevated the cunning. A matron mother might rule for centuries, carefully managing threats from rival houses and internal challengers, only to fall in a single night because Lolth decided her time had passed. This uncertainty kept even the most powerful Drow from becoming complacent. The priestesses of Lolth, who served as the backbone of this system, underwent training that was equal parts religious indoctrination and practical education and survival. They learned the rituals that pleased their goddess, the sacrifices that maintained her favor, the politics that kept their houses alive. They studied poisons and assassination techniques with the same dedication they brought to theological debates. They were taught that compassion was weakness, that hesitation was fatal, and the Spider Queen valued results over methods. A priestess who felt moral qualms about executing a rival or sacrificing a slave was not long for this world. Lolth did not want philosophers serving her. She wanted predators who could quote scripture. Lolth's realm is unlike anything else in the Abyss. Where other demon lords claimed lairs that were straightforward expressions of their nature, lakes of fire, frozen wastes, endless battlefields, the Demonweb Pits existed as a conceptual space given physical form. Imagine trying to map a spider's web, except the web extends directions that mortal minds cannot fully comprehend. And each strand connects to not just other strands, but to other planes of existence entirely. The demon web was not a place you traveled through by walking. It was a place you navigated by understanding Lolth's logic, and that logic was deliberately incomprehensible to outsiders. At the center of this impossible web sat Lolth's palace. The structure served as a fortress and temple both, but also something alive in ways that defied mortal comprehension. The walls were made from hardened webbing stronger than steel, shot through with veins of obsidian and decorated with preserved bodies of those who had displeased the goddess. The architecture defied conventional geometry. Rooms existed in states of perpetual flux. Hallways led to destinations that changed based on the walker's intentions or Lolth's whims. And distances were subjective rather than fixed. A supplicant might walk for hours trying to reach the throne room only to find themselves back at the entrance, while someone Lolth wanted to see could stumble into her presence after a single step. The throne itself was a masterwork of divine power and artistic cruelty, constructed from the bodies of her greatest enemies, transformed in eternally living but imprisoned sculptures. It served as both seat of power and warning to those who might challenge her. Former gods, demon lords who had underestimated her, mortals who had achieved such significance that their eternal punishment became worthwhile. All were incorporated into the throne's structure, trapped in perpetual awareness and agony. They would never know peace or death, serving forever as cushions for the Spider Queen's comfort. Lolth would sometimes conduct entire conversations with these imprisoned souls while her mortal or divine visitors watched, demonstrating exactly what awaited those who failed her. But the throne room was merely the most visible part of the demon web. The realm extended far beyond the central palace, encompassing vast regions where different aspects of Lolth's nature held sway. There were chambers where time moved differently, where centuries could pass in moments or moments could stretch into eternities. There were nurseries where her divine children hatched from massive eggs, already possessing supernatural intelligence and murderous instincts. There were training grounds where her favored champions engaged in endless combat, owning their skills while Lolth observed and took notes on potential weaknesses. There were libraries containing knowledge stolen from countless planes, organized according to a system that only the goddess herself fully understood. The most disturbing aspect of the Demonweb Pits was how it connected to other planes. Strands of the web extended through the astral plane, touching down in locations across the material plane and beyond. Through these connections, Lolth could observe events in distant places, whisper to her followers, and occasionally manifest avatars or aspects of herself when circumstances warranted direct intervention. She had, quite literally, spun a web across existence itself, and she sat at the center monitoring every vibration, every disturbance, and every opportunity for exploitation. Lolth's relationship with the rest of the pantheon could be described as universally hostile, with occasional temporary alliances based purely on mutual interest. The Seldarine despised her as a traitor who had corrupted their children and perverted elven nature. Other demon lords viewed her with suspicion because she did not play by their rules. She was not interested in raw conquest or overwhelming power displays, but in subtle manipulation and long-term controls. Gods of other pantheons who learned of her typically wanted nothing to do with her schemes unless they could somehow exploit them for their own benefit. Her most significant divine enemy remained Corellon Larethian. The wound of her betrayal had never truly healed, and while he had moved on to other relationships and other concerns, The fact that his former consort now ruled an entire species of corrupted elves was a constant source of pain and anger. Corellon made multiple attempts over the millennia to reach out to the Drow, to offer them a path back to redemption, to show them that the Seldarine would welcome their return. Every such attempt was undermined by Lolth, who used Corellon's compassion against him, framing his offers as weakness and proof that the surface gods feared Drow potential. Elstree, the Dark Maiden, represented perhaps Lolth's most personal failure and most persistent irritation. This goddess of good-aligned Drow stood as the living proof that Lolth's hold on the Dark Elves was not absolute, that redemption was possible, that another path existed. Elstree welcomed Drow who wanted to escape the Underdark's cruelty, teaching them to embrace moonlight and music and community rather than darkness and isolation and betrayal. Lolth viewed Elstree as competition for souls, and while the Spider Queen could not destroy her rival directly without provoking retaliation from the Seldarine, she made sure that any Drow who turned to Elstree understood they were declaring war on their entire species. Veyron, her own son, presented a different kind of problem. His portfolio included thievery, territory, and male Drow, making him a natural rallying point for those who chafed under matriarchal rule. Veyron taught that males and females should be equal, that the surface world was there for conquest rather than avoidance, that Drow could expand their reach beyond the Underdark. His theology directly contradicted Lolth's in key areas while still maintaining that Drow were superior to other races. The result was a permanent state of cold war between their followers, with Lolth's priestesses hunting Veyron's masked thieves while Veyron's agents worked to undermine matriarchal authority whenever possible. Among demon lords, Lolth maintained a carefully calculated position. She was powerful enough that direct assault on her realm would be costly beyond any potential benefit, cunning enough that making deals with her always carried risks of betrayal, and patient enough that her revenge might not manifest for centuries after an insult. Gratz found her intriguing and occasionally tried to forge alliances, drawn to her combination of intelligence and ruthlessness. Demogorgon saw her as a rival whose influence needed containing. Orcus largely ignored her, viewing her schemes as beneath his notice unless they directly impacted his own plans. What none of them fully understood was that Lolth was not interested in the typical Demon Lord games of territory and dominance. She was playing a longer game with higher stakes. Worshipping Lolth was not a matter of simple devotion or prayer. The Spider Queen demanded constant proof of worthiness, ongoing demonstrations of cunning, cruelty, and endless sacrifice on both enemies and occasionally allies. Her temples were not places of peace and contemplation, but arenas where power was tested and weakness was cold. A typical service might involve ritual combat, the sacrifice of prisoners or slaves, elaborate ceremonies that combine theology and practical lessons in poisoncraft and assassination, and always the expectation that those in attendance would scheme against each other even while participating in communal worship. The tests of Lolth were perhaps the most infamous aspect of her religious practice. These trials could come at any moment, triggered by the goddess herself or by her priestesses acting on divine inspiration. A matron mother might be commanded to sacrifice her firstborn child to prove her devotion. A promising priestess might be ordered to assassinate her superior and take her place. A warrior might receive a vision demanding he undertake a suicide mission into enemy territory. The key feature of these tests was their unpredictability and their often contradictory nature. Lolth might command loyalty one day and betrayal the next, mercy towards a prisoner today and execution tomorrow. This kept her followers constantly off balance, never certain of her will, always scrambling to interpret signs and signals that might not even exist. Prayer to Lolth typically involves offerings of some kind. Blood was preferred, ideally from a sentient victim, though the victim's significance to the supplicant mattered more than their inherent value. A priestess seeking guidance before a major political maneuver might sacrifice a beloved consort, demonstrating that ambition outweighed personal attachment. A warrior preparing for battle might offer the blood of his own hand, showing willingness to suffer in pursuit of victory. A house seeking Lolth's favor before declaring war on a rival might conduct mass sacrifices of slaves and prisoners, creating a spectacle designed to get the goddess's attention through sheer scale. The goddess communicated her will through multiple channels. Direct visions were rare and usually reserved for the most powerful priestesses or moments of genuine crisis. More commonly, her followers watched for signs in the behavior of spiders, which were sacred to her. A spider descending from the ceiling during important negotiations might be interpreted as approval or warning depending on its movements. Multiple spiders appearing together could signal significant events approaching. The discovery of unusual spider species in unexpected locations often prompted frenzied debate among priestesses about meaning and appropriate response. But Lolth also used silence as a tool. A priestess who sought guidance and received no answer faced an agonizing choice. Had she displeased her goddess and fallen from favor, or was Lolth testing her ability to act independently? The wrong interpretation could mean death, either from divine punishment or from rivals who sensed weakness. This uncertainty was deliberate. Lolth wanted her followers to develop their own cunning and judgment, to become self-sufficient predators rather than dependent supplicants. But she also wanted them to remain aware that her favor could be withdrawn at any moment. In the latter part of the 14th century DR, something unprecedented occurred. Lolth stopped responding to her priestesses. No visions came, no spells beyond the most basic functioned. Prayers went unanswered. For a society built entirely around their goddess's presence and favor, their silence was catastrophic. Some assumed Lolth was dead. Others believed this was a test of unprecedented scope. Still others saw opportunity in the chaos that followed. The truth, as it eventually emerged, was far more complex. Lolth had initiated what became known as the War of the Spider Queen, a massive divine scheme that involved her temporary withdrawal from mortal contact while she underwent a transformation. She was working to elevate herself beyond simple demon lord status, to achieve something closer to true greater deity power, to fundamentally alter her relationship with both the Abyss and the Drow. This required pulling back her divine attention from the material plane entirely, leaving her followers to fend for themselves. The chaos that resulted was exactly what Lolth intended. Drow cities descended into civil war as houses settled old grudges without fear of divine retribution. Male deities saw opportunities to expand their influence in Lolth's absence. Priestesses lost their power and status overnight, forcing them to adapt or die. It was a brutal winnowing process, and when Lolth finally returned, she had successfully purged the weakest elements of her religion, while proving to the survivors that they could endure even her temporary death. The experience traumatized the Drow, but also strengthened their devotion, because now they knew what a life without the Spider Queen looked like, and none of them wanted to experience it again. Some scholars argue that the silence was Lolth's greatest theological accomplishment, a demonstration of divine manipulation so profound that her followers actually became more devoted after experiencing her absence than they were before. She had weaponized their fear of abandonment, showing them that chaos and suffering awaited anyone who did not submit to her will. The Drow had briefly experienced freedom from their tyrannical goddess, and they had been so traumatized by the experience that they welcomed her return with genuine relief. While the Demonweb Pits serve as Lolth's true home, her influence on the material plane was extensively and carefully maintained. She could not manifest her full divine form there without enormous expenditure of power, but she had developed numerous methods for projecting her will and enforcing her dominance over the Drow. Avatars and aspects allowed her to appear in moments of crisis or opportunity, usually manifesting as a massive spider of supernatural size and intelligence, or as a Drow female of unearthly beauty hiding a monstrous spider form beneath illusion magic. These manifestations served multiple purposes beyond simple intimidation. They reminded the Drow that their goddess could appear at any moment, watching their actions and judging their worthiness. They demonstrated her power to those who might doubt her divine status. They provided opportunities for direct communication when subtlety was unnecessary or counterproductive. And perhaps most importantly, they generated stories that reinforced her mythology. Every appearance of Lolth became legend, embellished with each retelling, until even minor manifestations transformed into tales of divine judgment and supernatural terror. Lolth also maintained a network of creatures that served as her eyes and hands in the mortal world. Yaklol, her handmaidens, were demon servants who could assume Drow female form to move among mortals undetected. They served as spies, assassins, messengers, and sometimes as tests. A Yochlol might approach a matron mother with seemingly treasonous suggestions, testing whether she would report the conversation to her superiors or explore the possibility of rebellion. These demons were absolutely loyal to Lolth and served as extensions of her will, capable of independent judgment within the parameters of their assignments. Driders represented another aspect of Lolth's mortal presence, though a more tragic one. These creatures, Drow transformed into spider-centaur forms, were simultaneously punishment and servant caste. The transformation was inflicted on Drow who had failed Lolth in significant ways, but whose failure did not warrant outright execution. A priestess who lost the political battle but showed cunning in her defeat. A warrior who failed a suicide mission but survived through skill and luck. A matron mother whose house fell to rivals but who fought with impressive determination. The Drider form marked them as failed devotees while allowing them to continue serving the Spider Queen in a diminished capacity. The existence of Driders served a deeper psychological purpose in Drow society. They were living warnings, examples of what awaited those who displeased Lolth but were not quite bad enough to simply kill. Their presence in tunnels and caverns around Drow cities reminded everyone that failure had consequences worse than death. With the Spider Queen's creativity and punishment was boundless, and even exile from proper Drow society did not mean escape from her service. Most Drow viewed Driders with a complex mixture of contempt, pity, and fear, understanding that they themselves might one day suffer that same transformation. Understanding what Lolth actually teaches requires looking past the surface cruelty to the underlying philosophy. At its core, her theology is not about evil for its own sake, but about a specific worldview that values strength, cunning, and the will to improve through constant struggle. She teaches that the universe is hostile, that mercy is a form of weakness that will eventually be exploited, and the only reliable source of security is personal power coupled with strategic alliances that benefit both parties. This is not morality in any conventional sense, but a system of values specifically designed to produce survivors. The Spider Queen's teachings about betrayal are particularly sophisticated. She does not advocate for random treachery or constant paranoia, but for calculated decisions about where to maintain loyalty and where to sever ties. A Drow who betrays an ally for short-term gain when long-term cooperation would be more profitable has failed to understand Lolth's lessons. Similarly, a Drow who maintains loyalty beyond the point where the relationship has become detrimental is equally foolish. The ideal Lolth worshippers navigate a complex web of alliances and rivalries, always watching for shifts in the balance of power, always prepared to adapt when circumstances change. Her views on strength deserve examination because they're not as simple as they first appear. Physical power matters, certainly, and Lolth appreciates warriors who can dominate in combat, but she values mental acuity and magical talent even more highly. A warrior who can defeat any foe in single combat but cannot recognize manipulation by a cunning opponent will not last long in Drow society. A wizard who masters powerful spells but lacks political awareness is similarly doomed. Lolth wants her followers to be complete predators, physically capable, intellectually sharp, and ruthless when necessary. The concept of constant change and chaos sits at the heart of Lolth's theology. She explicitly rejects the idea of stable hierarchies or permanent arrangements. Nothing stays the same. Everything flows and shifts according to the strength of those involved. A house that rules Menzoberranzan for too long will find itself under assault from multiple directions. A matron mother who grows comfortable in her position will discover that Lolth has chosen to support her rivals. A priestess who expects her status to remain unchanged will wake up to find her divine magic severed. This enforced instability serves Lolth's purposes perfectly. Her followers can never unite against her because they are too busy fighting each other, and they remain dependent on her favor because that is the only constant in their chaotic existence. Not all Drow embrace Lolth's teaching, and those who reject her face obstacles that would break most mortals. The Spider Queen does not accept defection gracefully. A Drow who turns away from her worship becomes a target for assassination, labeled as a heretic whose death would bring favor to whichever agent accomplishes it. Entire families might be punished for one member's apostasy. Former friends and allies suddenly become enemies, driven by genuine religious fervor or simply self-preservation. The pressure to conform is immense, sustained by both divine power and cultural expectation. Yet, some Drow do escape. They flee to the surface world where they face discrimination from societies that view all dark elves as murderous monsters. They seek refuge in communities that accept them despite their heritage, constantly aware that their past might catch up with them. Some find their way to Elistre's worship, exchanging the Spider Queen's cruelty for the Dark Maiden's compassion. Others reject divine worship entirely, choosing to make their own path without any god's interference. A few become adventurers using skills learned in the Underdark to survive in the surface world while trying to define themselves as individuals, rather than as representatives of their race. Lolth views these escapees with a complex mixture of contempt and grudging respect. Their defection represents failure of her indoctrination, proof that her hold on the Drow is not absolute, but their very existence also serves her purposes. Stories of surface Drow who suffered discrimination and hardship reinforce the Underdark Drow's belief that exile from Lolth's favor means a life of misery. Tales of failed defectors who were hunted down and killed brutally discourage others from attempting escape. Even successful apostates sometimes find themselves being manipulated by the Spider Queen, who has centuries to plan and might decide that a seemingly independent Drow actually serves her larger schemes better than an obedient priestess would. The most famous Drow apostate, Drizzt Do'Urden of House Do'Urden, exemplifies both the possibilities and the costs of rejecting Lolth. His story has become legendary across the surface world, proof that Drow can choose different paths, that the Spider Queen's corruption is not inevitable. But his life has also been marked by constant struggle, ongoing conflict with his heritage, and awareness that his former society views him as the worst kind of traitor. Lolth herself has shown interest in Drizzt at various points, not because he poses any real threat to her power, but because his continuing existence serves as a useful tool for testing her followers and identifying potential weaknesses in Drow society. While the Drow represent Lolth's primary worshipper base, her influence extends beyond the Underdark into the surface world. Small cults dedicated to the Spider Queen can be found in shadowy corners of civilized lands, usually among people drawn to her promises of power through ruthlessness. These surface cultists often misunderstand Lolth's actual teachings, attracted by the aesthetic of evil and chaos without grasping the underlying sophistication of her theology. The Spider Queen tolerates them because even poorly informed worship generates divine power, and occasionally these cults produce individuals cunning enough to be genuinely useful. Surface Drow who have not fully embraced Elistre or rejected divine worship entirely sometimes maintain covert connections to Lolth. They may not actively worship her, but acknowledge her power and occasionally seek her favor when desperate situations demand drastic solutions. These half-apostates occupy an uncomfortable position, neither fully committed to their goddess nor truly free from her influence. Lolth watches them with interest, aware that their divided loyalties make them potentially useful tools if circumstances align correctly. More disturbing are the non-Drow who willingly embrace Lolth's worship despite having no cultural connection to her. These individuals have usually reached points of desperation or ambition where conventional deities seem insufficient. A noble seeking power over rivals, a wizard pushing boundaries of acceptable magic, a revolutionary willing to employ any methods to achieve their goals. Lolth accepts their devotion as long as they prove useful, granting them access to her divine magic and supernatural support, but she views them as disposable in ways that Drow followers are not. A surface cultist might be sacrificed to advance a scheme where a Drow priestess would be preserved, simply because one represents a renewable resource while the other does not. So what does Lolth actually want? The question has troubled scholars and theologians for millennia, because her actions often seem contradictory or self-defeating. She maintains power over the Drow by keeping them weak and divided, which prevents them from becoming a genuine threat to surface nations. She demands constant chaos in Drow society, which makes long-term planning nearly impossible. She tests her most loyal followers in ways that often result in their deaths. These choices make sense only when viewed through the lens of her actual priorities. Lolth's primary goal is not conquest or expansion, but the maintenance and perfection of her divine power base. The Drow represent her worshippers, the source of her divine energy, and she has crafted their entire civilization to ensure continuous devotion. By keeping them locked in endless competition, she guarantees they will always need her favor. By preventing any single house from becoming too dominant, she ensures no Drow leader can rival her authority. By maintaining the matriarchal system, she places herself at the center of all significant decisions. The instability that seems counterproductive from a military or economic perspective makes perfect sense from a theological one. Her secondary goal involves revenge against Corellon and the Seldarine, though this manifests in subtle ways rather than direct confrontation. Lolth cannot simply declare war on the elven pantheon. She lacks the power to win such a conflict. Instead, she corrupts and perverts everything the Seldarine represents. Corellon values beauty, so Lolth teaches that beauty is a weapon to be deployed for advantage. The Seldarine promote harmony among their followers. Lolth demands conflict and competition. Traditional elven culture emphasizes cooperation and community. Drow society celebrates individual achievements at any cost, with each success coming at someone else's expense. She's created a mirror image of elven civilization, dark and inverted, as an ongoing insult to everything Corellon tried to build. Some scholars argue that Lolth has a third goal, eventual elevation to true greater deity status and dominance not just over the Drow but over some significant portion of the multiverse. Her actions during the Silence support this interpretation. She was attempting to fundamentally alter her divine nature, to transcend the limitations of demon lord status and achieve something more permanent and powerful. That attempt was partially successful. She emerged stronger than before, though still not quite a greater deity. But the fact that she made the attempt suggests ambitions beyond simply maintaining her current position. The terrifying aspect of Lolth's scheming is the timescale. She thinks in terms of centuries and millennia, not years or decades. A plot might take generations to mature. A seemingly random act of divine intervention might be setting up circumstances for a payoff that will not manifest for hundreds of years. She can afford this patience because she's effectively immortal, and because the Drow provide a stable power base that allows her to focus on long-term planning rather than immediate survival. Other deities might accomplish more in the short term, but few can match Lolth's ability to play the extended game. Lolth has achieved something genuinely remarkable in the annals of divine history. She took a punishment, exile from the Seldarine and imprisonment in the Abyss, and transformed it into the foundation of a theological empire. She corrupted an entire race of elves so thoroughly that most Drow cannot even conceive of life without her influence. She created a society that functions as an ongoing tribute to her power, where every aspect of daily life reinforces devotion to her teachings. And she did all of this while maintaining the flexibility to adapt when circumstances changed, surviving catastrophes that would have destroyed less cunning deities. Her influence extends beyond the Drow in subtle ways. The concept of divine betrayal and fall from grace resonates across multiple pantheons, with Lolth serving as the premier example of how ambition can lead to transformation rather than destruction. Other evil deities study her methods, trying to understand how she maintains such absolute control over her followers. Good deities use her as a cautionary tale, warning about the consequences of unchecked ambition and the dangers of sacrificing morality for power. She's become a mythological touchstone, representing treachery, corruption, and the dark reflection of what elven society could become if it had pursued power over principle. The Drow themselves remain her greatest accomplishment and her most significant limitation. They provide her with power and purpose, an entire civilization devoted to her glory. But they also constrain her, because maintaining control over them requires constant attention and intervention. A deity who did not need to micromanage their followers to this degree could pursue other ambitions more freely. Lolth has essentially chosen to become the absolute monarch of a single racial group rather than seeking broader but shallower influence across multiple species. Whether this represents strategic genius or a self-imposed limitation remains debatable. What cannot be debated is the Spider Queen's effectiveness at the role that she has chosen. She survived for thousands of years in one of the most hostile environments imaginable, the Abyss, while maintaining divine power comparable to much older and more established deities. She's weathered assassination attempts, divine conflicts, and her own periods of absence and transformation. She's created a legacy that will persist long after any individual Drow's lifetime, ensuring that generations yet unborn will grow up within the system that she designed. And she has done all of this while remaining one of the most feared and hated deities across multiple pantheons, proof that popularity is not required for divine success. At the center of the Demonweb Pits, Lolth sits and watches. Every strand of her web carries information, vibrations from across the planes, news of schemes progressing or failing, reports of followers who prosper or perish. She processes this constant flow of data with an intelligence owned over millennia of divine existence, identifying patterns that others miss, seeing connections between events that seem unrelated, planning moves that will not reach fruition for centuries. She is patient because she has learned that patience, combined with careful manipulation, achieves results that hasty action cannot match. Her followers fear her. She cultivates that fear carefully, ensuring it never becomes so overwhelming that it paralyzes action, but remains strong enough to prevent serious rebellion. Some Drow hate her, resent her control over their lives, dream of escaping her influence. She uses these malcontents as tools, watching to see which might become genuine threats and which are merely engaging in harmless fantasy. Other deities plot against her, seeking ways to break her hold on the Drow or reduce her influence in the broader pantheon. She prepares contingencies for these attacks, laying traps within traps, ensuring that anyone who moves against her will discover the cost exceeds any potential benefit. Most of all, she knows that she has succeeded. Not in the way she originally intended when she was still Araushnee, plotting to overthrow Corellon and dominate the Seldarine. That scheme failed spectacularly, resulting in her current form and circumstances. But she has created something arguably more impressive than simple dominance. She has built a system that perpetuates itself, that generates divine power without requiring her constant direct intervention, that adapts to changing circumstances while maintaining core principles. The Drow will worship her long after any individual Drow's lifetime because she's made herself essential to their identity, inseparable from their understanding of what it means to be Dark Elves. The Spider Queen's webs extend across the multiverse, touching planes and peoples who might not even realize they've been brushed against her influence. A conspiracy in a surface city, carefully cultivated over decades, might serve some obscure purpose in her larger schemes. A Drow priestess conducting a ritual in the Underdark might be unknowingly setting events in motion that will not reach their conclusion for generations. A hero battling Drow cultists might believe they have struck a blow against evil, unaware that their victory served Lolth's purposes by eliminating weak elements of her following. The web is vast, complex, and ultimately incomprehensible to anyone but its creator. And so she sits, the demon queen of spiders, the fallen goddess who became something arguably more powerful than she was before her exile. She monitors her empire of darkness and cruelty, making adjustments when necessary, allowing events to unfold when intervention would be counterproductive. She tests her followers endlessly, seeking to perfect the system she's created, to produce Drow who are the ultimate expression of her philosophy. She plots against her enemies with patience of immortality, aware that revenge delayed for millennia tastes sweeter than hasty retaliation. She builds towards goals that she has not shared with anyone, planning for futures that might not manifest for thousands of years. She is Lolth, the queen of the Demonweb Pits, and her story is far from finished. The web she has woven continues to grow, extending into new territories and touching new victims. Her children, the Drow, spread through the Underdark and occasionally venture to the surface, carrying her influence with them whether they intend to or not. Her schemes progress according to timetables measured in centuries. Her power grows incrementally, sustained by the devotion and fear of those who know that defying her means suffering worse than death. The Spider Queen watches and waits. She has all the time in the world, and she knows how to use it.